There are no public events on President Trump's schedule as he spends the day at Mar-a-Lago, his estate in Palm Beach, gearing up for the final stretch of his first 100 days as president. The milestone, just about 2 weeks away. April 30th is the day. Have the early days of the Trump presidency been good ones for America's economy and businesses? You may own one, you may work at one. Here to talk about it, Democratic Strategist Richard Goodstein and former Republican Governor of Virginia, George Allen. The sentiment's certainly really good around here. Every sentiment index that I see, whether it's a home builder sentiment or just consumer sentiment, spiking.
It is, and I know the president just met with the National Association of Manufacturers about 10 days ago. They're all optimistic, and I think both things are, people see a can-do spirit. They see the regulatory reform already being done and effectuated. But I think people want more, and I think a lot of it is anticipation. A lot of them may be even holding back on making certain purchases of equipment, thinking, okay, they're going to get a much better stimulus, a much more internationally competitive tax code, in addition to the regulatory reform and the infrastructure. The energy policies, by the way, of this administration have been very positive, whether it's the Keystone Pipeline or other activities. And so those in the energy community are positive. I think most manufacturers, small businesses, but they didn't pass that repeal and replacement of Obamacare, which matters a lot to small businesses.
And, Richard, they can't blame the Democrats for that, because it was that very conservative wing of the Republican Party, the Freedom Caucus, that derailed that. There's been a lot of talk that President Trump would move toward the Democrats to get tax reform done. Do you see that happening? And if so, what do Democrats need to hear before they sign on?
Well, one thing they want to see is his tax returns before they proceed. They don't want to do anything. No, listen. First of all, he's run out of excuses. His returns to be submitted tomorrow or Monday, they're not going to be under audit.
Tuesday, actually.
Tuesday, thank you. Tuesday.
Don't panic our viewers. You have till the 18th.
They're not going to be under audit. So, look, the fact of the matter is, Democrats, the last thing they want to do is do something that's going to give Donald Trump, bigger tax breaks. Look, when Donald Trump is calling Chuck Schumer a clown, when he continues to kind of run against Hillary, that's not exactly endearing him to Democrats, right? I mean, he's at historically low approval numbers. That's not helping him across the board.
Actually, in the past week, since the Tomahawk missile strike on Syria, it has come up.
But still lower than any other president 80-some days in. So I think that, look, take tax reform, for example. Republicans can't decide what they want to do. That same group that were holdouts on health care, they have certain ideas that I don't think the moderates in their party agree with, let alone Democrats. And on infrastructure, their attitude is, we just spent, we just had a highway bill. We're not going to spend $1 trillion. Where's that going to come from? So, I hope Christine Lagarde's right.
Democrats love infrastructure spending, too.
And most people do. And here's where I think, rather than, they're not going to see Donald Trump's tax returns, what people care about are their own. And how complicated and aggravating it is to be paying so much money in, plus filling them all out. In fact, the best reform would be make every member of Congress fill out and complete their own tax returns. You'd end up with much more simplified systems. But we have the highest taxes in the world on businesses. I think there can be a coalition of Democrats. It may not be a lot of them, but someone like Ron Wyden, Senator, a Democrat from Oregon, has worked in the past on this, and I think they could come together. On infrastructure, if you allow the repatriation of profits, overseas profits, and tax it, say, at 10%, go to a territorial system of taxation, but that revenue can be dedicated to infrastructure.
Which is what Charlie Gasparino said was possibly happening.
Yeah, but not just that. It needs to be a big package. And, in fact, revenues from offshore drilling, why not? The federal government gets royalties from these lease sales. Dedicate that to roads and infrastructure.
But as we look, there has been a lot of, we called it shifting sands, from President Trump's opinions even just a few days ago or a few weeks ago. China's now not a currency manipulator, and NATO is not obsolete right now. You may roll your eyes, Richard, but it appears he's coming more to the center, and that makes people feel a little bit calmer.
Yeah. So when you say shifting sands, which is a very generous way, it assumes that there were sands that were any place in the first instance, right? So whether he said about Janet Yellen staying, whether he said we should or should not bomb Syria. I mean, the tweets of his alone are all over the place. And I guess the question I ask is, and I defer to you two, do we have any reason to think that whatever he said last is going to be sticking a week from now or a month from now? And if it was our allies, they're looking at the question, are we closer or less close to the unthinkable, a nuclear kind of war?
Well, George, you've run for office, obviously, right. Governor of Virginia, and you've said certain things on the trail, and then the facts changed. What do you do so that you don't look like a flip-flopper?
Well, I think you have to be guided by principles and stick to your principles, and evidence comes in. On the currency manipulation from China, even Chuck Schumer, who is one who was always blasting away at this, says really in the last 2 years China hasn't been manipulating the currency. They had in the past. The Export-Import Bank is a prime example of one that I could not understand how Republicans were against this. Mm-hmm. When I was in the Senate, somebody said, hey, we got to get rid of this Export-Import Bank. My reaction, of course, anytime somebody's suggesting getting rid of a government agency,
well, yeah. I think it's critical.
But the reality is it makes money. It does not compete with the private sector. It helps American jobs. And if other countries around the world are supporting their industries, we ought to support American jobs. And I think that President Trump finally got to the truth on the Export-Import Bank and realized that really allows American manufactured goods to compete.
But, Richard, what do you...
shouldn't just stay... When the facts change or the evidence change, you shouldn't just say, well, I'm going to keep that same position. That's just being not a very good leader and realistic and
so
pragmatic.
You don't break. But Richard, and we got to go, but what's the #1 top economic lesson you think the president has learned in this first 100 days?
The talk is not enough. The fact of the matter is that 98,000 job number last month, that's pretty... If it was a Democratic president, if it was Hillary was president, Republicans would be screaming bloody murder. What matters are policies. He said we'd be sick of winning so much. If you look at health care, if you look at trade, if you look at Mexicans paying for the wall, we're kind of losing. I think he's got to put policies in place that are going to move things and not just talk.
Okay, it's so
action is what's wanted, and people want to see jobs and investment, and I think this president and administration has the prescription to do it. Now they have to execute and work together.
George, great to see you.
Great seeing
Richard,
you.
Lovely to have you. Happy holidays.
Yes,
safe weekend, please.